if you don't know, part of my day job is vibe coding applications and building internal tools and MVPs for the clients that we work with or we're trying to pitch. I have been putting it off for a long time because I do not want to pay a subscription to use a tool like this. But I finally gave in today, and honestly, I'm not that disappointed. And what I want to do in this video is give you a really high-level understanding of how I will build documentation for multi-feature, quite large applications, databases and backends and all the APIs, all that sort of thing, and how I've taken my knowledge from the last 2 years and put it straight into Cursor. So yeah, the last 2 years or so, I've been using, I started out using ChatGPT, literally copy pasting from GPT 3.1 or 3.5 into VS Code. I need a file to this, and it was done. And, I tried Cursor at the time, and I tried Windsurf, and then Codex 5.1 came out, and I started using the Agentic tool in there, and I was really happy with that. And then really recently, Google Antigravity came out with their Gemini 3, and I was really happy with it. I thought, oh my God, this is fantastic. But you do like 5 minutes work and then you have 5-hour cooldown before you can use it. So the timeouts made it basically impossible to use. So at that point, me being me, I decided, I think I need to build my own agent because there's ways I like to work that these tools just aren't doing it. And then I was doing some research and I just thought I'll give Cursor another go. And yeah, it's surprisingly good. So that's what got me onto it. Let me walk you through how I am setting up my project planning. It might look complex and it does take a lot of time, but the more you do up front, the faster, the better, the easier everything is going to be. When you are starting your project, the first thing you should do is work out all of the pages that your project has. So this project is an application I've been working on for the last few days. And then I blew it away because I had a terrible demo and then spent almost $50 on tokens trying to fix it. I gave up. I'm like, delete. And I came back to the basics because I was trying to hack my way through it because, I know better. The first step I should have taken, and I want you to take, is planning the pages. So as you can see, here we have a registration page and a login and a reset page, and that will then go to the application. And then there's some notifications, and then there's a settings page, and then there's a blah, blah, blah. So you get the idea. So we list out all of the pages. Then we start to list out what are the general functions that are going to be on each page. So when you go to the settings page, okay, there's a function to manage users. There's a function to manage roles. What am I going to find on that page? And you kind of work through and you can sort of go, well, actually, this should be on its own page or this would be its own page. And you can really map out the scope of the pages. The next step is you go to GPT or Claude or whatever you're using, and you put all of this data into ChatGPT and you tell it. For instance, this needs to be a multi-tenant database. When a user sets up a data domain, the data that they create, all of the headers will be different. All of the data can be different. There could be 50,000 records within it, 100,000 records within it. So I give it some context as to what's going on. What you do is you ask it to build a database schema for you. And you say, I want you to output me a database schema that I can use in dbdiagram.io. This is what it gives you. And this is essentially how, the first initial database setup will be. And this is important. You don't have to worry about it. GPT will do all of the connections. You just have to be really descriptive in this is the data I need. Now we move into Cursor. So I've built a project plan, and maybe I'll link it somewhere if anyone's interested. But this is a project plan specifically for a React front end, a Postgres back end, and for it to run in Docker. You should be using Docker, get Docker Desktop, install it, because then you can get it to spin up these sort of applications and it'll just run on your computer. You don't have to worry about setting up environments and all that sort of thing, right? And I've asked it to have a Python backend. So all of the logic of the application will use Python. And then React is the front end, and that's all of the buttons on the front. So this project plan is a step-by-step guide that I used, and it will output essentially the whole project setup, the template. First off, I get it to check that Docker's running. Then I get it to create this project setup. I have these docs, and I have tests, scripts, and the plan. Now, the documentation, this is where when you create a function, the function or the front end needs to be documented. If you haven't put comments in the code, you're wasting tokens in your code. But if you get it to document, then when you build a new function, it can always reference the documents. It stops it from just randomly making up stuff. And then I get it to do a database schema. And this is where, during the process, you copy the information you got out of ChatGPT in that DB diagram and you paste it into here. This now knows how to set up what the database is going to look like. And then it creates an app plan purely with this basic thing. And this is going to be where you break down, and I can show you, what are the pages? And then on the pages, will it require authentication? Meaning, does someone have to log in to get to this page? What would be the URL? This is register. And then what is it? And then I create user stories. So an organization admin will enter their organizational name. So where this is their registering account, they'll add the name. This now can reference the database schema. So it knows, oh, okay, right. So this is a multi-tenant service and it has to think. So when it's building its APIs, it knows exactly what it needs to do. And then I can put in, I want it to only have underscores or whatever. So it's a form, right? And I get it to make a component. I want a registration form. Does this have any permissions required to it? No. Once I've done this up to this point, I'll then get the AI to work out, knowing that this is a Python and a React front end and blah, 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 and multi-tenant, what are the API endpoints that are needed for this to work? And here's a login and password forget. They're exactly the same. User stories. What are the components? It needs a login form and we need a password reset form. And then what are the API endpoints that are needed for this to work? So it creates a page. Then it starts like initializing the project. It creates a git init. Git is essentially bookmarks in your code. When you finish a function, you do a git add, and then you do a git commit, and that means this function, everything in the code, locked in, we're good. The next step you take could break everything. It's fine. You've got a bookmark, go back to that version, and you're good, and it just rolls it back. So every time you finish a singular function, and you've tested and it all works, you do a bookmark, you do a commit. In Docker Desktop, they now have an MCP toolkit, which means you can connect MCPs in here, have them as servers, and then Cursor only has to connect to Docker Desktop. So it's one connection and it will get all of the information. You can have lots and lots of different MCPs through Docker Desktop. And you connect it up in the Cursor settings, tools and MCP, Docker there. And it's just a connect and off you go. So very simple to add MCP servers in there. The important one is this context 7. So context 7 makes sure that when your AI is installing libraries and versions of tools and stuff like that, that it doesn't just randomly use something that's out of date or broken. And it also has up-to-date documentation. If it pulls a library and it needs to know something, context 7 is its documentation. It's always up to date. It just makes life easy. So I'll get it to build the React front end, and I want it to essentially create some default component. So I want it to set up some folders, and I want it to have a registration form and a login form, navigation and footer. These are the default stuff. I'm going to use it everywhere. The features, that's when we start to build components. They'll get put into the features section, and we do everything. It's important that we do everything small and compact. Every function we build, no longer than 300 lines, which brings me to, I'm going to go back into settings, rules and commands. This is a global rule set. This is every time we do a project, this is what I want you to be always following. And it's really just sort of reinforcing bits of the project plan. But the important thing is this: no file may exceed 300 lines. That's important. If you make sure that every file is 300 lines long with no comments, it rarely breaks things because it's not trying to recode 800 lines just because one thing changed. If it needs to rebuild, it's 150 lines. It'll do it like that, no issues. But if you've got 25 functions on a page, and a little change has to happen, it might rewrite, forget, drop stuff, break stuff. That's why it breaks stuff, because it's rewriting massive things. So just this, if you do nothing else, that's the one. Make sure it always does 300 lines, no more. Okay. As we get it to build, we get it to add these components into the function. And then it will go, okay, here is the docs, here's the front end, here is the function, what I've just created. Then we get it to install styling. So part of the very first chat you have is this. We are creating an application, what it is, what's the design styling, what style do I want? I'm going to use the Carbon design system. The colors are whites, grays, enterprise feeling. I want charts, there's tables. I want it to be responsive. And this is a multi-tenant application. Then it was in that initial plan, I'm like, I actually need it to do extra stuff. So additional requirements that aren't in the plan are this. And then I add the plan. So I give it some scope and I go, here's the plan. And that's the very first step I took. And then it starts working through the plan, which, while I was talking about the styling, is I wanted this to use Tailwind and Carbon Design System or Material Design or ShadCN. And it's like, if I'm using Carbon, I want to make sure it installs the Carbon React icons. I want it to install the Carbon React charts. And this essentially says, if that was what I chose, make sure we go and install this. And then here's the backups. This is the structure I want on the back end, create the environment. This is the database I want. Now here, I specifically told it to stop so I can then copy in the database schema I created because it needs to build and do the migrate and set it up. Unfortunately, it didn't stop. I had to manually stop it at that point, copy in my thing, then say, okay, it's now there, and then continue it on from there. So that was a bit annoying, but then came in, did the migration, set up the stuff, created a basic sign-in page, some components, set up Docker, created the environmentals file, which is the database access and API keys that I know I'm going to need. And then it did the migrate. So essentially this plan is what I gave it. And then I just said that one pros, this is what we're doing. This is the design thing. Here's the thing. And it just works. It just worked through the project and it set it up. So this doesn't work. I haven't got any further this, but using that project plan, creating that page structure first, using it and ChatGPT to create the database structure, ensuring that nothing is longer than 300 lines in any file, using Docker Desktop as the MCP, getting it to build the applications and database in Docker Desktop, and just getting it to follow that plan gets your project set up in a way that is really what many developers would take a day or two just to get all the environmentals and everything set up for multiple databases and backends and APIs and all of everything installed. So now when I wanted to create the page, for instance, let the create account, it has a style guide it can work off. It has a structure. It knows the APIs it needs to build. So this is what we're going to do. I'll try it now. So I'm going to get it to build this registration form and see if we can get this running. Please review let's give it some context, the app plan, the design styles. Your task is to update the registration form on the register page. You will create the APIs needed. You will create the component of the form. The components needed follow the style guide. I want the center middle of page. Update the API, the docs API. No, I want to get it to when the UI is complete and the APIs will create the org and user. Write a unit test script in called org reg and put it in the tests front end folder and run it. 6 is valid creation org and user and lead test org and user. Yeah. And actually we need two things. I need to give it the context. I need to give it the database schema so it knows that. So I'm going to use Gemini 3 Pro on agent. Let's see what happens. And there we go. I mean, it took a little while. That was the first test I needed to get it to test, and that was the first one it's ever run. So it had some issues. I had to install some stuff and had issues, but it kept working through it, and it worked. The APIs work, and I don't know why it decided to create a new folder, but it did. We should have, here we go, tests in the front end. This is the test that it ran. And it passed. So now that there is a valid test we know works on first go, when I need to do something later, all I have to say is if I make a change, I use the valid test as the guidelines that it has to work like this because it's built a test on this is how it's supposed to work. If it doesn't pass, the test is the rule and we have the other guides. In a nutshell, it's about creating a lot of content. And you can start to build these things really fast. So I could just get it now to build the login section. And then I have multi-tenant authentication done, built. Very long story short, it may have been worth biting the bullet on Cursor. The amount I use it, I'll probably spend less on Cursor than I would in API credits anyway. And yeah, I hope that this one complex was helpful.